Welcome to NTD News. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Here are today's top stories. New guidelines to reopen the country allow people to go back to work and back out to the dinner or movies, but only under certain terms. President Trump has the announcement. Midwest governors are banding together in an effort to kickstart their states' economies. They'll plan how best to open up after lockdown. 80 million Americans have already received their stimulus deposits. We hear from some about what they plan to do with them. The G7 joins the call to reform the World Health Organization. Republican lawmakers are calling for its Director General to resign. President Trump announcing guidelines to open up America again. The 3 phases outlined yesterday apply only to states that are ready. He said the final decision is still up to each state.
We are not opening all at once, but one careful step at a time.
The White House unveiled 3-phase guidelines on Thursday afternoon for governors to reopen their states. President Trump said the decisions are based on the latest data. The new guidelines aim to clear the way for an easing of restrictions, with each phase lasting at least 14 days. But to begin reopening, each state must meet the criteria, like showing decreasing numbers of virus cases and influenza-like illnesses over a 14-day period, with a capacity for hospitals to treat all their patients. Hospitals must also have a testing program for at-risk healthcare workers. The guidelines advise employers on social distancing, hygiene practices, and more. People are still encouraged to work from home until the 3rd phase. And while healthy Americans can return to work in the 2nd phase, the most vulnerable groups of people should still stay home until phase 3.
Instead of a blanket shutdown, we will pursue a focus on sheltering the highest risk individuals, so important.
In phase 1, large venues like sit-down dining, movie theaters, sporting venues, and places of worship can operate under strict protocols. But schools and bars must wait until phase 2 to reopen, with non-essential travel minimized until then too. Elderly people and those with underlying health issues should not go out in public until phase 3. President Trump said the final decision goes to each governor. And to manage the situation across the country as a whole, he said the administration will continue increasing virus testing capacity and take steps to prevent the virus from entering from abroad.
Border control, travel restrictions, and other limitations on entry are more important than ever to keep the virus in check and allow Americans to get back to work.
The president added that all political parties were working together for the good of the country.
And governors from the Midwest take action for the economy. They're joining together to coordinate efforts to reopen their states for business.
The bipartisan group of governors announced the move on Thursday. Together, their Midwest regional partnership will work to restart the local economy.
The states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana will work in close coordination to reopen our economies in a way that prioritizes workers' health.
The partnership will allow the governors to share data and advice.
We will make decisions based on facts, science, and recommendations from experts in healthcare, business, labor, and education.
The group says it will be most effective if states work together to phase in sectors of the Midwest economy. But Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers says that doesn't mean every state will reopen all at once.
We can't think of this like flipping a light switch. It's like turning a dial. The more disciplined we are now, the faster we can turn it.
The Midwestern Alliance joins PACs on the West Coast and in the Northeast, announced earlier this week. Altogether, the 17 states covered by the partnerships are home to nearly half the country's population.
Global stocks jumped today as hopes the U.S. economy would reopen trumped news of China's economy shrinking.
Global investors chose to look on the bright side Friday, despite one huge negative. New numbers showed China's economy shrinking in Q1 for the first time on record. It contracted 6.8% as lockdowns bit. But the decline had been expected, and traders had a more positive story to compensate. Donald Trump on Thursday setting out plans to reopen the US economy. States may soon get a green light for gradual returns to work. Shares jumped on the news. Benchmark indexes in Japan and South Korea closed over 3% higher, with Chinese stocks also gaining. The positive mood carried over into the European Open. There, the regional stock 600 jumped close to 3% in early trade. Indexes in France and Germany did even better. Rolls-Royce was among the top gainers. Shares in the aero engine maker leapt close to 9% following news that key customer Boeing is poised to restart production. Oil traders did not join the party though. While international benchmark Brent crude edged higher, US prices sank again. A barrel of West Texas oil can now be yours for little more than $18.
In a chorus of calls for a review of the World Health Organization, leaders of G7 nations and Republican lawmakers all hold the same view, that the WHO mishandled the CCP virus crisis.
The White House said in a statement that leaders of the G7 nations called for a thorough review and reform of the World Health Organization. President Trump led a video conference with the G7 leaders on Thursday, their first meeting in a month. The video conference was held to discuss plans for each nation's recovery. According to the White House, much of the conversation centered on the lack of transparency and chronic mismanagement of the pandemic by the WHO. Following President Trump's criticism of the WHO this week, Republican lawmakers suggested that the UN agency's Director General should resign. 17 Republicans on the House's Foreign Affairs Committee wrote a letter supporting the halt of U.S. funding to the WHO. They wrote that funding should not resume until Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus resigns. In the letter, the 17 congressmen said they had lost faith in Tedros. They said they blamed the Chinese Communist Party and the WHO for mishandling the epidemic that led to a global pandemic. President Trump said previously the WHO has promoted China's disinformation about the CCP virus. What's more, also on Thursday, a group of 8 Senate Republicans called for an international investigation into the organization and the origins of the virus.
And Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe today agreeing. He says there are issues with the WHO and Japan will review its funding after the pandemic is resolved. And in other news, Americans have started getting their stimulus deposits. The money is meant to soothe the economic impact of the CCP virus. Here's what some are planning to do with the extra funds.
When Mark Grimaldi saw $2,400 in relief payment deposited into his bank account, the retiree knew immediately how he would spend it. The payment for he and his wife came in on Wednesday morning.
It's because I had filed tax returns in 18 and 19 years and had direct deposit for federal or state refunds. I was already set up.
He talked about what he might use the money for.
It's called a stimulus, check, which means that, it leads me to believe we should go out and spend it somewhere to keep the economy going, which, may eventually happen. But for right now, we're going to hold it in abeyance and keep that back for, something more pressing like mortgage or, something that is unforeseen in the next several months.
The economic impact payments are being issued under the $2.3 trillion CARES Act. It was passed by Congress last month to help Americans survive the economic impact of the CCP virus pandemic. Some stimulus recipients are using the money to help others.
So I have a few friends that were working in the service industry in restaurants and bars who are currently out of work. So I spoke with them yesterday and offered to help out if they needed it. So that's kind of my first thing. And then whatever I have left over, I'm going to probably pay towards my student loan debt that I have from undergrad.
According to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, 80 million Americans would have received their payment by Wednesday. Paper checks will be sent out next week to people who don't use direct deposit.
The United States Tennis Association says it will oversee more than $50 million in spending to help the sport weather the pandemic.
As part of the plan, the governing body for tennis in the United States said it will identify more than $20 million in savings by reducing salaries of its management and eliminating programs in player development and operations. The USTA, along with its partners, will offer economic assistance packages, increased support to navigate government assistance for facilities and coaches, as well as webinars and phone support to help individuals. The USTA, which runs the U.S. Open, says the extent of its future support will be determined by the financial performance of the Grand Slam. It's currently scheduled for August 31st to September 13th in New York. The USTA still plans to stage the U.S. Open, which is the main source of revenue for the organization. It said all decisions regarding the tournament will be guided by federal and local governmental agencies. Both the men's ATP Tour and the WTA, which runs the women's circuit, suspended all tournaments until June 7th after countries started locking down borders.
The Navy finds sailors infected with the CCP virus to be mostly asymptomatic. This after almost all crew members aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt were tested.
Testing the entire crew of the virus-stricken U.S. aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt may have revealed a clue about the pandemic. The majority of positive cases are among sailors who aren't shown symptoms. The possibility that the virus spreads in stealth mode among young, healthy people could have major implications for policymakers. It also asks questions about how well the virus spread can be captured if only those suspected to have it are tested. Testing is almost complete for the aircraft carrier's 4,800-member crew. It's a big move in a case that has already led to the firing of the carrier's captain and the resignation of the Navy's acting secretary. Roughly 60% of the over 600 sailors who have tested positive so far have not shown symptoms. The Navy didn't speculate about how many might later develop them. The figure is higher than the 25 to 50% range offered by the White House Coronavirus Task Force member, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
That's easily transmissible.
California's governor says the ventilators that Tesla's Elon Musk promised to deliver haven't shown up. Musk said last month he had gotten a hold of more than 1,000 ventilators to help California hospitals treating patients with the virus. But now, more than 3 weeks later, Governor Gavin Newsom's office says none of the promised ventilators have been received. Musk tweeted at Newsom overnight asking him to, quote, fix this misunderstanding. He also posted email screenshots with an LA County Health Department official apparently showing they had tested the ventilators. A part-time paramedic is using his unique experience to urge people stressed over being stuck at home to pay close attention to their mental health.
Bobby O'Donnell was running 7 years ago when bombs planted near the finish line of the Boston Marathon killed 3 spectators, wounding 260 others. A part-time paramedic for the past 6 years, he now helps to transport COVID-19 patients to the hospital in New Hampshire. He also urges everyone to look after their mental health while staying at home.
Mental health is going to be a huge ripple effect that comes out of this. And especially, too, emergency rooms are going to struggle to deal with, psychiatric issues because we're telling people to not go to the hospital. And people who normally would go out to seek help are now afraid to go into this environment.
O'Donnell and others suffered invisible injuries from the bombing, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. He's sharing what he learned from the experience in hope he might help someone feeling traumatized by the pandemic.
One of the worst things that we do with mental health is there's this huge stigma around it that, we don't talk about it. And I think that we really need to open that dialogue a bit more.
O'Donnell has written a book and does public speaking about his ordeal and his quest for inner healing.
Up next, governments around the world demand the truth from China. They want to know how the virus originated and say it may have come from a lab in Wuhan. We have the details after the break. Welcome back. Governments around the world are becoming increasingly frustrated with China's lack of transparency around the CCP virus. U.S. leaders want the truth on how it originated, and they're asking if it leaked from a lab in Wuhan.
Leading political figures are demanding China come clean about the beginnings of the novel coronavirus or CCP virus. America and other countries now asking if the virus actually came from a lab in Wuhan.
I will tell you, more and more we're hearing the story, and we'll see.
Just 10 miles from the seafood market in Wuhan, where the CCP says the virus originated, is one of the largest infectious disease labs in the world. It's known to house coronaviruses. The U.S. says its investigations are so far inconclusive, and opinion is divided in the scientific community.
Majority of the views right now is that it is natural, that it was organic. But I think we need to continue to work this. And once we get beyond the pandemic, we'll have a chance to look back and really find out what happened.
China denies the virus came from the lab, but isn't allowing independent investigators in to check. This kind of secrecy has frustrated governments around the world as they struggle with the pandemic. Many criticizing the regime for covering up the outbreak by silencing whistleblowers and censoring the media.
We can't have one of the largest nations in the world hiding information or not being transparent when it comes to helping us deal with this.
And the dissatisfaction with China is bipartisan. 90% of Republicans and almost 70% of Democrats say the Chinese regime is responsible. The UK's acting Prime Minister Dominic Raab said Thursday it won't be business as usual with China after the pandemic. Australia's Home Affairs Minister echoing that sentiment Friday.
I do think there will be a reset about the way in which the world interacts with China. We do want more transparency. When you've got a Communist Party that doesn't have the transparency that other comparable economies have, then that is a problem.
French President Emmanuel Macron also casting doubt on the CCP's official story on Friday. He says it's naive to think China has handled things better than the West, and that many things happen there that we don't yet know about.
A new hotline is rewarding people for reporting anyone, including Chinese citizens, who cross over the border with Russia and into China. NTD Xu Wenrong has more.
As the situation inside Heilongjiang province worsened, the Chinese regime last week temporarily closed that province's border with Russia. One Chinese lawyer says it's a way for the regime to shift blame.
They have a basic method of shifting the blame to others. They want to create the impression that the domestic cases are under control, and they would love to label all the new cases as imported cases. They are using this method to kind of shift people's attention from the real domestic situation.
On April 13th, Heilongjiang Provincial Authority announced it would reward citizens for handing over or reporting illegal entries at the border. This includes Chinese citizens coming from abroad. The reward per report could be more than $700.
I think this is a very cruel, inhumane, unethical, and illegal practice. They have deprived people of their basic human rights, treating their own citizens as terrorists and robbers.
As we previously reported, some Chinese citizens in Russia were sent back by the Russian government due to the pandemic, and some are returning home with the belief that the Chinese regime has things under control.
The Chinese Communist Party knows that Russia is sending away Chinese citizens, but the regime has closed its border. In fact, they are just trying to keep the number of so-called diagnosed to zero in their own country, to keep it like that. They don't care about the lives of their own citizens.
Chinese history expert Li Yuanhua said this situation contrasts with democratic countries where governments make every effort to send evacuation planes to China to pick up their own citizens and bring them to safety.
You can't ignore everything. The law, the basic rights and dignity of being human, just to combat the pandemic. This is against the law and the moral bottom line.
A resident in Harbin, Heilongjiang, agrees.
The Chinese regime is irresponsible. They should take the initiative to bring their own people back, and not to wait for another country to send them back.
In a video circulating online, a netizen said every day there are Chinese citizens crossing the border who get stuck there. Their tweet said these 31 Chinese citizens were stuck on the street between Russia and China for 12 days. They hope that the regime could arrange something, but in reality, they're wandering around as a result of arrangements made by the Chinese regime. Reporting by Xu Wenrong, NTD News.
Coming up, the Notre Dame Cathedral fire is remembered a year later. The cathedral bell rang for the first time since the blaze. More on that after the break. Starbucks has a plan for coming back after last month's closures. The company says it will monitor and adapt as it reopens certain cafes. CEO Kevin Johnson said each community would decide when to reopen their cafes depending on local conditions. Johnson also said the company has developed a dashboard that aggregates government data on confirmed virus cases and trends. Some U.S. locations are offering drive-through only service. Others offer entryway pickup, curbside delivery, and at-home delivery. It's been 1 year since France's Notre Dame Cathedral caught fire. Restoring it to its former glory, a decidedly uphill battle. Recent stay-at-home orders forcing work there to be suspended. Our France correspondent, David Vives, has the story.
Notre Dame Cathedral, devoured by flames, triggered shock and astonishment across the nation. Firemen fought a long battle to put out the blaze, and even then, specialists were not sure it could be saved after the roof and spine of the building collapsed. The memory of the blaze is still vivid for many Paris residents, like this artist who sketches the monument.
It allowed me to express my feelings, to fight against the feeling of powerlessness that we had when it burned down.
1 year on, the cathedral is beginning to show signs of revival. The great bell of Notre Dame, rescued in the nick of time, tolls over Paris, a first since the fire. Notre Dame is the heart of Paris. It's the heart of France, and it's quite right that she should express herself this evening. French President Emmanuel Macron promised on Wednesday the cathedral would be rebuilt within 5 years. The cathedral has also garnered support around the globe. Around $247 million have been raised for its reconstruction. Yet it remains fragile, supported by scaffolding. Architects managing the works say there are a number of complexities involved. The cathedral is still in the phase of being secured and stabilized. He says the scaffolding was supposed to be removed by March 20th, but the CCP virus changed the game.
Regarding what causes the blaze, the investigation is stalled. The investigators need to have access to certain parts of the cathedral where the blaze starts, but those are difficult to reach due to the fragile structure of the cathedral. And the more time will pass, the less clues the investigators will find, which means there's some chance the cause of the fire will remain unknown. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, astronauts returning from space are in for a surprise. It's not the same Earth they left over 200 days ago, and lockdowns have shifted their usual landing place. Find out more when we return. The American flag lit up the face of a mountain in the Swiss Alps, a sign of solidarity, hope, and strength during the pandemic. The Embassy of Switzerland in the U.S. on Thursday shared a photo of the flag emblazoned across the iconic Matterhorn peak on Facebook. The post read, "Switzerland is sending hope and strength to the United States of America." It's part of a series of nightly projections by the artist Jerry Hofstetter that shine from 10 p.m. to midnight local time as a way to spread hope and unity during the worldwide outbreak. The Matterhorn straddles the border of Switzerland and Italy. It is nearly 15,000 feet tall. Earth will feel like a very different place for the latest crew returning from the International Space Station. For the two NASA astronauts, the journey back appears to have been the easy part.
I'll see each other next.
The long trip home from space for these returning astronauts has just got a little longer. It's a very different Earth they come back to, given the lockdown rules in place around the world. After 205 days in space on the International Space Station, NASA astronauts Andrew Morgan and Jessica Mir, as well as their Russian cosmonaut counterparts, landed in the Kazakhstan desert on Friday and now face a detour to ensure they get to their final destinations. Travel restrictions throughout the country meant search and rescue teams could not set up base as usual, and so the crew of the Soyuz MS-15 spacecraft will head to a Russian-owned spaceport after being extracted from the capsule. The journey isn't done there either. The US astronauts will then take a 186-mile drive to the city of Kozloduy, where they will board a NASA aircraft to finally take them home. But when they've completed 3,280 orbits of Earth and a total trip of 86.9 million miles, a little further to get home probably won't bother them too much.
And that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in. Catch up again at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Tiffany Meyer.